Hey, in this video we will be making a mini-map in our tank game. So I'm in Unity, and the idea behind this mini-map is that I want to have some UI element that's covering up part of my game here, just in the corner. And what's going to be rendered on there is going to be a representation of the objects in my scene, just taken from a different view. So in terms of Unity, one way we can put that together is create a UI panel or just a raw image, something like that, that fits in the corner, and we can render into that image as long as it's displaying a render texture. That is a special texture object that supports both being used as an image source, but also as a destination for rendering. And we can use a camera to produce that rendering. So we take a camera, we render it onto this raw image, and then we draw that raw image onto the screen. And there's our minimap. So I'm going to start by creating the raw image. Let's go to UI, raw image. I want to make sure that it's in just my normal canvas. Okay, I'll name that my minimap. And then in the 2D view, I can go and arrange this properly. So I want it to hang out in the corner, very close to the edge is fine, and I'll use the anchors, split it up to wrap around this thing, so that it always takes up this much space on the screen. Let's make it a little bigger. There we go. And you can see in the raw image component we have a texture field. We'll have to fill that in with the render texture. So let's create that next. I'm going to create a new textures folder and create a render texture. Where is that? Render texture. Okay, great. So I've got a render texture now, just an object set up to accept image data, and I'll drop that into the texture field here, so whatever gets rendered onto this render texture will show up in my minimap corner. And now I want to create a camera so that I can render onto that render texture. Camera, this will be my minimap camera. Okay, so over in the camera properties, there are a couple of settings we want to mess around with. One of them is target texture. This is going to tell it that it isn't rendering onto the screen, but it's rendering onto a texture. So here's a render texture we can render onto, and you can see it updates, and we can now see something getting rendered. The camera preview should match what's shown there. And if I select my camera, I can also see what that camera is looking at, which is a whole lot of nothing. I kind of want to bring that down into my scene. All right. And I want it rotated so it's facing down. And I'll move it up a little bit, and you can see my camera preview till it gets about right how far I'd like the player to be able to see it. I'm using a perspective projection here for my camera, which is the default, but there are some cases when you don't want things to be distorted on the edges like a normal projection. Normal perspective projection. And so you can change the projection to orthographic, which sort of flattens everything out. You can see the effect that has on the camera's viewing box. So now everything within this square is what I'm going to see. So let me change the size of that square. and that'll let me zoom out a bit. And it doesn't have to be all the way down through the ground that far. Alright, well, that's plenty far. Okay, so orthographic projections, it doesn't matter how close or far away the camera is, just as long as it is on the correct side of the geometry you want to see. Once I go through here, you'll see the camera preview shows that it's disappearing. But unlike a perspective projection, the orthographic projection kind of flattens everything, and things don't change size when they get farther away or closer to the camera. Okay, so let's go to this setting on the camera. There's a culling mask, which is going to decide what things are visible in my minimap. So let me make sure my minimap is showing up all right. Yeah. So the culling mask, you can select layers, and whatever is in that layer is going to get shown. And if you uncheck it, then it will completely cut out the rendering of that object. So I kind of want it to not render really any of this stuff. So I can click on nothing and start fresh here. I actually want to make new layers so that I can be specific about which objects get to show up in the minimap. So let me go to my project settings, tags and layers, and I'll add a couple of layers. I would like minimap only and default and minimap. So two different layers, because there are some objects where I'm okay with them getting rendered on both the normal view and the minimap. And then there are some objects that I want just on the minimap. So back to my culling mask, I can select those two, activate them. So now those are both on. And this means I'm going to have to go back through my other cameras, any other cameras I have in the scene, and make sure that they do not render the minimap only option. So here's one for my UI, that's fine. And my main camera, I believe those are my only two other cameras. My main camera should also render default in minimap, so turn that on. Okay, and then I can start picking out objects that are going to be appearing in my minimap. So things like the goal here, maybe that should be on default in minimap. And this cactus and other decorations and stuff I can put on default in minimap. And then some objects like the tank, I don't really want my tank to show up on the minimap. It's got a lot of detail, which would be distracting. I might want a placeholder object, so a stand-in for it. So let me open up that prefab. And let's add an object on here. I'm going to add a child object to the tank chassis so that it turns when the tank turns. And so I'm going to create a cube. Scale it up so it's roughly the same size. And let's throw a material on there. Okay. So for this cube, I do not want the box collider. I just want it to be for rendering. So I'll remove the box collider component. Mesh renderer is fine, but I want to make sure that the layer it's on is minimap only. So it doesn't do anything except get rendered on the minimap. And I'll name it minimap stand-in. There we go. And I can do that to any other object that I want to show up. So let me look at my minimap camera. And so far, it shows me that I've got this green cube or green box in the center. That looks kind of like cactus thing over there. The goal is showing up. Let me run it and make sure that's what I see. All right, yep, there it goes. And so as I turn, it turns as well. Looks good. So I need a couple of things here. I don't like this background. It's just like flat gray. I can control that by changing the background of the camera itself, and change the clear flags to a solid color. Let me make sure that's not fully transparent. Getting the right color might be tricky, but I could sample from my existing terrain, and that's fine. Another thing I could do is create a plane. So here's a plane that is on the Minimap only layer and has no collider. And I can make it so that it is a child of the Minimap camera, so wherever the Minimap camera goes, then this plane will follow under it. So that's another option. Okay, and then I just need to make that plane big enough that it takes up this whole Minimap camera, and then I can apply whatever material or color I want to that thing. So here's some sand color. I can apply that same material. So now in that preview, if I go this way, the lighting is still affecting this, and that can be sometimes hard to read. So I could change the material. Let me make a new material. Unlit sand. So I'll take its color from here, but I want to change the shader. Instead of being a standard lit shader, I'm going to choose an unlit shader that just draws a color. So there we go. And I'll apply that to my plane. There. No more shine effect on that plane. Some things that might be tricky here or might look weird, depending on your lighting, there might be shadows that show up on these different objects. And so we can disable those shadows too if for specific objects if we want to. We can do it for the camera, and it'll apply to all objects. So let me create a new script. This will be no shadows. And so this is kind of a weird workaround for disabling shadows, but we can try it. Okay, so what I'd like to do, let's get rid of this stuff. There are two functions that will get called by Unity on pre-render and on post-render. And on pre-render, I'd like to adjust the quality settings. There's a shadow distance that gives us some quick way to disable the shadows. I don't know if this is the best way, but it's a quick way to do it. So before we render on pre-render, disable all the shadows. On post-render, we will restore it. So it's a float. So let me get a float here. Okay, so let's save that value, set it to 0, and then when we're all done, restore it. Cool. Alright, so now with this no shadows script on my Minimap camera, it should remove the shadows from the objects that get rendered. All right. We also would like it so that when you move around, the minimap follows the player. So if you have a reference to the player through like a game manager script, then that makes it really easy. So let me create another script. And this one's going to be overhead follow. Let's put that on the minimap camera and mess around with this. So in this script, we want to, we really don't, since I have a game manager, accessing this is really easy. I would like it so that every frame, this object, it's going to be the camera, just moves to the same X and Z positions, so stays above the player and points down at them. So I could do that just fine in update, but I'm going to be using late update instead. That makes sure that everything before has already moved, and this object will move afterward. So we want to change the transform position. Let's get new vector 3, and our target is from our game manager, or you can use any reference to the player. Do I have the player reference in here yet? I think not. So let me just use a plain reference, public. Let's do transform, make it easier on ourselves, and this will be the target. Alright, so we want the target's position.x. We want to preserve the camera's position.y, and then use the target's position.z. Okay, so transform.position.y is this object, so its y is not changing, it's staying at the same height, and so every frame it'll move to keep above the target object, or the target transform. So now I've got the target here. Let me grab my tank, toss it into that reference, and there we go. Alright, following us around. So now with that plane under the minimap camera, we don't see edges of anything. This terrain is not on the minimap layer, so I don't see any details and stuff. It keeps it uncluttered and simple, easy to read at a glance. So going further with this, I would definitely add stand-in objects for the other tanks so I can see them on my minimap. And any other objects that I want to show up, I would have to choose which layer they belong to, so that they're on the proper minimap only or default and minimap layers. All right, so that's how you can create a minimap using a camera rendering to a render texture that is displayed in your UI. I'll see you next time.